don't know who else is.
I started
We
recording
can,
when you said good evening.
Good.
we can get
Perfect.
started. We can get started.
Yes, I think, okay, wonderful. So can someone offer a prayer, please? See, Shaheen is, yeah, good. But you're also muted.
Trying to find one. Any recommendations? I mean, any suggestions?
Whatever.
Let's just do one for gatherings. O thou merciful God, O thou who art mighty and powerful, O thou most kind Father, these servants have gathered together, turning to thee, supplicating thy threshold, desiring thy endless bounties from thy great assurance. They have no purpose save thy good pleasure. They have no intention save service to the world of humanity. O God, make this assemblage radiant. Make the hearts merciful. Confer the bounties of the Holy Spirit. Endow them with a power from heaven. Bless them with heavenly minds. Increase their sincerity, so that with all humility and contrition, they may turn to thy kingdom and be occupied with service to the world of humanity. May each one become a radiant candle. May each one become a brilliant star. May each one become beautiful in color and redolent of fragrance in the kingdom of God. O kind Father, confer thy blessings. Consider not our shortcomings. Shelter us under thy protection. Remember not our sins. Heal us with thy mercy. We are weak, thou art mighty. We are poor, thou art rich. We are sick, thou art the physician. We are needy, thou art most generous. O God, endow us with thy providence. Thou art the powerful, thou art the giver, thou art the beneficent. Abdul Baha.
Thank you. So we had talked about a number of possibilities, Mateen and Iman and I, about doing more study. And I suggested this, the promised day has come, because it's so relevant to what's going on in the world right now. I mean, as we're there, the only question is, has World War III started or not? It is one of two very long letters that we think of as books, but were actually written as letters. The first, as you know, is called The Advent of Divine Justice. And that was written just as World War II was getting started in Europe. And the Advent of Divine Justice, we mainly look at because of what it has to say about race relations, which is really not doing it justice, because the Advent of Divine Justice is, as he says in the beginning, he's writing to the last fort that's still standing. So many of the Baha'i communities in Europe have already fallen, and they're countries such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, which were connected in the Commonwealth with England, are already in the war. Iran is getting cut off, and many other areas of the world are being cut off. And he's writing to North America, where the war has not really reached at that point. And basically, he says, you are the last fort standing. And I'm going to tell you everything you need to know in case we can't continue this conversation. So he helps the American Baha'i community to understand its history, to understand its spiritual destiny, to understand the problems inherent in the United States, which includes the issue of racism. But he also talks about moral degradation, materialism, corruption, other things that are equally as important, even though we know that the race issue is the most challenging issue. He doesn't say it's the most important issue. He says it's the most vital and challenging issue. So we tend to look at that section and we forget that then the vast majority, after he gives this very clear-eyed, no holds bar look at the American community, is about teaching. Because we have to keep building the faith while the rest of the world is falling apart. So the 9-year plan continues going on during World War II, because the goals are to finish opening areas in the United States, Canada, and Central and South America. And because the war, there is some naval stuff going on, German U-boats off the coast of the United States and so forth. But for the most part, North America doesn't have fighting happening. And so during that whole period of World War II, we're still sending pioneers out and travel teachers, even though it's really difficult because there are constraints the governments place on travel and so forth. But the work of spreading the faith is continuing even during World War II, which is a wonderful story that hasn't been fully told. We like to talk about the 10-year crusade, but this is the period leading up to it. The Promised Day Is Come is a 136-page letter, not a book. The only book he considered a book was God Passes By, which is also written during World War II. But this is written about 2 years after Advent of Divine Justice. And as Hogenson says, he wrote it after he first had to flee the Holy Land, got to England by the skin of his teeth. You know, she talks about it as they're waiting to try to get a boat from to cross the English Channel, and the Nazis are bearing down on them. And you know, I mean, like minutes, he gets a boat and they get to England, and he's just sitting there just like this, you know. And Khanum is going crazy, Rahia Khanum, his wife, about are they going to make it? Because they did not want Shoghi Effendi to fall into the hands of the Nazis. And so he gets to England, and things in England are also really bad in 1940. And so they are able to take a boat down to the tip of Africa, to South Africa. And then the only way they can get back to the Holy Land is to go the whole length of Africa, back to the Holy Land. This is Shoghi Effendi's second trip to Africa. And they're again the Germans are starting to operate in North Africa. The colonies are being drawn into the war, many of the African colonies. And so there's a race to get back to the Holy Land before he can't get back there anymore. So as soon as he gets back, finally gets home safe and sound, he writes this 136-page letter, which we now know is a book. And this is actually written to the Baha'is of the world. The Advent of Divine Justice is written just to the United States or to North America. But this is written to all the Baha'is. And essentially, this book is his statement about the state of the world and understanding world events from a Baha'i perspective, particularly the tumultuous period that we were being plunged into. But it has obviously many, many things for us to learn for today. So before we get into this wonderful thing, and Sarush, can you let me share so I can put a PowerPoint up, please?
Very sorry about that. Let me see here.
That's all right. Let's see if we can do that.
Okay.
Okay,
Try now.
excellent. All right. So let me set this up as a slide. All right, there we go. So I have been trying to take the text of this book and create a PowerPoint with it. And I've got about a third of the text already done. And that's already 142 slides. So I think that the group needs, tonight we're going to look very closely at some text, but I also think as a group, you need to decide there are two ways we can approach this book. The first is for me to each week summarize large hunks of it, which will make it a lot faster. But the other approach is to take the text and to go through it, maybe certainly not word for word, but to try to engage with the text a lot more. And I think that this is certainly a very rich possibility, because by 1941, when this was released in March of 1941, he's been guardian for 19 years, almost 20 years. And he's really hit his stride as a writer and his ability to communicate with the Baha'i world. So let's see what you think. Let's see how far we get tonight, how fast it's going. But otherwise, we'll be in for, if you choose to go with all of the text on the screen at some point over the course of this study, it will take probably some months. If you don't want to put that amount of time into it, then we can do something that's a little bit more of a summary. But the very first part of this is some of these passages you'll be very familiar with already, but you will see just right out from the very beginning, what he has to say is astounding. And I think spending time learning to carefully study the Guardian would be good for all of us. So, all right. Katya, yes, go
I
ahead.
wanted to raise just a possible idea.
Mhm.
What if you told us maybe what pages we're going to do so we can read it ahead of time?
That would be
And
good.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I would like, that would be easier for me. I'd love to read it on my own so I know what to expect, and then we can summarize it or something like that.
Okay. So let's see how fast we sort of get through stuff tonight, and then that will be, I'll be happy to send out an email. The other thing is that what he's going to do is talk about the letters to the kings. And then he's going to talk about his own commentary about those letters, and then what happened to them, and then start looking at some big things like the fall of Christianity, the fall of Shia Islam, and so forth. So it may well be that perhaps if some of you are willing to do a tiny bit of homework, like if we assign someone Queen Victoria or the Shah or whatever, to do a short summary on that person, and then we can talk about what Baha'u'llah had to say to him, and then what Shoghi Effendi says about the letter to that particular person. So, I mean, we have Summons of the Lord of Hosts, which of course is the full compilation of those letters that the House of Justice put out a few years ago. But what we have here is, I guess you could say, the abridged version of those letters with Shoghi Effendi's commentary. So we're not going to get to those tonight, but we can get to this. His introduction to this is gripping. So that's a good idea, Katya. So let's see, and we can revisit this also as we get toward the end of the session tonight. So Katya, could I ask you to read what's on the screen, please?
Sure. A tempest, unprecedented in its violence, unpredictable in its course, catastrophic in its immediate effects, unimaginably glorious in its ultimate consequences, is at present sweeping the face of the earth. Its driving power is remorselessly gaining in range and momentum. Its cleansing force, however much undetected, is increasing with every passing day. Humanity, gripped in the clutches of its devastating power, is smitten by the evidences of its resistless fury. It can neither perceive its origin, nor probe its significance, nor discern its outcome. Bewildered, agonized, and helpless, it watches this great and mighty wind of God invading the remotest and fairest regions of the earth, rocking its foundations, deranging its equilibrium, sundering its nations, disrupting the homes of its peoples, wasting its cities, driving into exile its kings, pulling down its bulwarks, uprooting its institutions, dimming its light, and harrowing upon the soul of its inhabitants.
Anything that jumped out at any of you on that very amazing first paragraph? we could spend a whole hour just discussing this paragraph.
For me, I don't know, I hadn't noticed it before, but harrowing up the souls of its inhabitants. I mean, that's just very personal, you know?
Yeah,
I'm used to the Guardian always saying about, you know, the bigger picture. Okay, yeah, exile its kings. Okay, well, I'm not a king. I'm not going into exile, right?
right.
But like harrying up the soul of its inheritance, that basically means we're all vulnerable to what's going on.
Right.
Feels very personal.
That reminds me of another quote by the Guardian that says that we are, as Baha'is, not immune to like the danger and kind of catastrophes that are going to come upon humanity, and we're gonna be in the struggle as well as everybody else. And then there's another quote that he said that I don't know where this is from, but to a certain degree, we are responsible for the extent of the damage or the kind of
The prolonged
chaos that is ensuing. Yeah, because we're meant to be, teaching to our maximum capacity, and the worse we do, the more it falls upon our shoulders.
Well, the Guardian, as we get toward the end, addresses what we need to do with all this. And the House and the Rizwan letter this year, it was a downer, the last part of it, and basically said that we're not going to be immune from all the things that are going on in the world, obviously, and that we're in very dark days at this point. So bewildered, agonized, and helpless, it watches this great and mighty wind of God invading the remotest and fairest regions of the earth. Dr. Peter Kahn said to one time when I was with him that when he was a counselor in the Pacific, before he went to the World Center as an international teaching center, then a House of Justice member, part of his job as being in the board of counselors for Australasia was going to all kinds of islands in the Pacific. And he had read this from the Guardian of invading the remotest and fairest regions of the earth. And he would look at these little islands and think, well, surely all of these terrible things aren't going to happen here. But going back even some years later, 8 or 10 years later, drugs, alcohol, all kinds of other things that were affecting the rest of the world had invaded the remotest and fairest regions of the earth, even these little islands in the Pacific. Any other thoughts on this very?
I thought it was interesting, kind of like you highlighted, that it calls it a cleansing force, because in my mind, that has a positive association,
Right,
that it's something that has to happen.
right. However much undetected the cleansing force is. And it also says unimaginably glorious in its ultimate consequences.
And he's specifically speaking because World War II is happening as well, right?
It's already well underway. In 1941, the Battle of Britain's well underway. The Pacific has already much worse. Japan has already been on the move in China and attacked a number of other countries. Japan has not yet attacked Pearl Harbor. That's some months away, but it's already well on the move. So many people are now referring to World War II as not World War II, but World Wars too, that because it was like multiple wars going on in different theaters. So things are already pretty nasty in a lot of places in 1941. Okay, so let's move on. Mona, could I ask you to read this page, please?
The time for the destruction of the world and its people, Baha'u'llah's prophetic pen has proclaimed, hath arrived. The hour is approaching, he specifically affirms, when the most great convulsion will have appeared. The promised day is come, the day when tormenting trials will have surged above your heads and beneath your feet, saying, taste ye what your hands have wrought. Soon shall the blasts of his chastisement beat upon you, and the dust of hell enshroud you. And again, and when the appointed hour is come, there shall suddenly appear that which shall cause the limbs of mankind to quake. The day is approaching when its civilization's flame will devour the cities, when the tongue of grandeur will proclaim, the kingdom is God's, the Almighty, the All-Praised. The day will soon come, he referring to the foolish ones of the earth has written, whereon they will cry out for help and receive no answer. The day is approaching. He moreover has prophesied when the wrathful anger of the Almighty will have taken hold of them. He verily is the omnipotent, the all-subduing, the most powerful. He shall cleanse the earth from the defilement of their corruption and shall give it for an heritage unto such of his servants as are nigh unto him.
Pretty strong stuff. Any thoughts or comments on this one? Shaheen.
Whereon they will cry out for help and receive no answer. Wow.
Yeah. Well, look at the poor people in Mariupol and all these, places right now, crying out for help and receiving very little answer or no answer.
I think it's like, especially since it's referring to the foolish ones of the earth.
Right.
Like there was Baha'u'llah gave several warnings, and there were so many ways to avoid all of this.
Right.
And if not avoid, then at least mitigate
Right.
most of this.
Right.
And then when the whole thing has now gone underway and has now gained momentum, it's like you can't stop that giant snowballing effect that's getting
Right.
bigger and bigger, and you're trying to like hold it back. It's like too late now.
Right. Right. Good point. Other thoughts? Okay, so he wants us to also see that the Bab has the same thing, essentially. To those who deny him, for them we have prepared as justly decreed by God a sore torment. O peoples of the earth, I swear by your Lord, ye shall act as former generations have acted. Warn ye then yourselves of the terrible, the most grievous vengeance of God, for God is verily potent over all things. By my glory, I will make the infidels to taste with the hands of my power retributions unknown to anyone except me. and will waft over the faithful those musk-scented breaths which I have nursed in the midmost heart of my throne. The midmost heart of my throne. That's an interesting idea. Mateen, can you read this, please?
The powerful operations of this titanic upheaval are comprehensible to none except such as have recognized the claims of both Baha'u'llah and the Bab. Their followers know full well whence it comes and what it will ultimately lead to. Though ignorant of how far it will reach, they clearly recognize its genesis, are aware of its direction, acknowledge its necessity, observe confidently its mysterious processes, ardently pray for the mitigation of its severity, intelligently labor to assuage its fury, and anticipate with undimmed vision the consummation of the fears and the hopes it must necessarily engender.
Again, any thoughts on this? This is sort of what the House of Justice has also been helping us to understand what's in this paragraph. That we're not confused about what's going on. Their followers know full well whence it comes and what it will ultimately lead to. We don't know how far it will reach, but we recognize where it comes from, know its direction, acknowledge its necessity, observe confidently its mysterious processes. And here's one thing we do need to do: ardently pray for the mitigation of its severity, intelligently labor to assuage its fury, and anticipate with undimmed vision the consummation of the fears and hopes it must necessarily engender. One of the things that on Horace Holly had
Please start recording.
Okay, so Horace Holly, for the rest of his life, coming very close to World War I and talking to people returning from the front lines about some of the real atrocities that they had personally witnessed, seeing the troop movements and so forth, it had a real impact on him. So in the 1920s and 30s, he decided, along with a couple of wealthy Baha'i women in the United States, that they needed to get Baha'u'llah's message about world peace to the leaders of the United States, to opinion leaders and politicians and people who could do something about the state of the world so that we wouldn't slide into the next world war, because they knew that Abdu'l-Baha had predicted another war at the end of, after World War I ended, he predicted another one. And so they thought if they could only get a peace movement started, and they started an organization, they started a journal to go with the organization called World Unity, and they spent a lot of time and money over a period of about close to 10 years. And finally, Shoghi Effendi said to Horace, "You're wasting your time. You're wasting your time." And that it would have been much better for them to put their energy into trying to get more Baha'is to do the work of the faith, rather than to try to go directly to the leaders of the world with Baha'u'llah's message. So Donya, could you read this, please?
Yes, this judgment of God, as viewed by those who have recognized Baha'u'llah as his mouthpiece and his greatest messenger on earth, both a retributory calamity and an act of holy and supreme discipline. It is at once a visitation from God and a cleansing process for all mankind. Its fires punish the perversity of the human race and weld its component parts into one organic, indivisible, world-embracing community. Mankind in these fateful years, which at once signalize the passing of the first century of the Baha'i era and proclaim the opening of a new one, is as ordained by him who is both the judge and the redeemer of the human race, being simultaneously called upon to give account of its past actions, and is being purged and prepared for its future mission. It can neither escape the responsibilities of the past nor shrink those of the future. God, the vigilant, the just, the loving, the all-wise ordainer, can in this supreme dispensation neither allow the sins of an unregenerate humanity, whether of omission or of commission, to go unpunished, nor will he be willing to abandon his children to their fate and refuse them that culminating and blissful stage in their long and their slow and painful evolution throughout the ages, which is at once their inalienable right and their true destiny.
A lot in that paragraph. Is there anything that jumped out or that you don't understand in that paragraph or that makes you uneasy?
So the Guardian uses this analogy of children, and I wanted to, I think if you go back 2 slides, you asked if we have any thoughts. I didn't say anything, but let's see.
Is this it, or you need to go back?
Actually, this one, yeah. So first of all, I thought this was kind of in parallel. I don't know if that's like there's some kind of writing technique, but it's like in parallel to the very beginning, the very first paragraph, where the Guardian said they can neither perceive its origin nor understand its significance. So, and this is in stark contrast to that. Their followers know
Right.
full well whence it comes, what it will ultimately lead to. But I wanted to go back to the analogy of the children because I was thinking, how can, you know, how can we reconcile the fact that humans have free will with the fact that, it's being written here that this, mistakes will be made and humanity will go through these stages of suffering. And this analogy of the child kind of makes sense to me because, we have free will. We don't believe in predestination, right? From some answered questions, like a knowledge of a thing is not the cause of its occurrence. And to me, this analogy of a child makes sense because a parent knows, like, let's say a child is reaching for something, hot, like there's a kettle and there's steam coming out of it, and the child is going to touch it, and the parent knows that the child is going to touch it, and it'll tell it. It might even tell it, don't touch it, but it still touches it, and the parent still knows that it's going to touch it, and the parent may or may not prevent the child from touching the kettle or the steam. But this kind of makes sense to me. Like, the Guardian is warning us that these things are going to happen, and it's like we can warn other people about it, and we can try and stop, we can try and diminish the terrible effects, but I guess something will happen. Something is still going to happen.
I found it really interesting where he talks about refuse them, nor will he be willing to abandon his children to their fate, and refuse them that culminating and blissful stage in their long, their slow and painful evolution throughout the ages, which is at once their inalienable right and their true destiny. So we're going to get to the golden age because it is mankind's inalienable right and their true destiny. Inalienable right is a very interesting that we were programmed from as a species to get to a spiritual stage for humanity, a golden age. Any other thoughts on this one paragraph here?
There's, oh, sorry, Martin, you go.
No, go ahead. Okay, I'll just say something quickly. It says, the part that it says, and you highlighted, it says, mankind, it can neither escape the responsibilities of the past nor shirk those of the future. Is a little bit, I freak out a little bit over that, but I also want to know more on what that means, because in some ways it's an eye opener for me, because a lot of times we like, what's the purpose for humanity? If the past is the past and whatever, wow, who cares? Let's just move on. But really here it's showing that those that have lived a life, although they might be minuscule, it could have been a servant, even his actions are important to those today.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, in this country, we're having a great debate right now as to what are our responsibilities, because in the past we had slavery in this country. You know, what are our responsibilities today because of that? But what are also our responsibilities toward the people in the future? Do we leave them a planet that's degraded, generations of not well-educated children? You know, what are our responsibilities to the past and to the future? What are our responsibilities with regard to colonialism, even though it might be in the past? Katya, you also had something to say about this paragraph.
Yeah, I had a quick thought on the line that says, its fires punish the perversity of the human race and weld its component parts into one organic, indivisible, world-embracing community. Because so often we automatically think humans, by their nature, in whatever like difficult situation, the more we're put in like quote unquote survival mode, the more we go towards animalistic tendencies. And this completely denies that and reverts that and says, actually, the more difficult it gets, it's gonna like physically, like it uses physical imagery of like welding us into one community that can't be divided.
Mm-hmm. Organic, indivisible, world-embracing community. I mean, the pandemic being worldwide has shown us that we needed to work on it together. And we didn't do a great job of that. So let's see, Mona, you've already read, I think, haven't you? Okay, so Shaheen, can you read this, please?
Sure. Bestir yourselves, O people, is on the one hand, the ominous warning sounded by Baha'u'llah himself, in anticipation of the days of divine justice, for the promised hour is now come. Abandon that which ye possess, and seize that which God, who layeth low the necks of men, hath brought. know ye of a certainty that if ye turn not back from that which ye have committed, chastisement will overtake you on every side, and ye shall behold things more grievous than that which ye beheld aforetime. And again, we have fixed a time for you, O people. If ye fail at the appointed hour to turn towards God, he verily will lay violent hold on you, and will cause grievous afflictions to assail you from every direction. How severe indeed is the chastisement with which your Lord will then chastise you. And again, God assuredly dominateth the lives of them that wronged us, and is well aware of their doings. He will certainly lay hold on them for their sins. He verily is the fiercest of avengers. And finally, O peoples of the world, know verily that an unforeseen calamity is following you, and that a grievous retribution awaiteth you. Think not the deeds ye have committed have been blotted out from my sight. By my beauty, all your doings have my pen graven with open characters upon tablets of chrysolite.
I'm sure most of you have seen at least some of these quotes before, particularly that last one. Any thoughts about it? Any?
For me, the fixed time where it's like God is going to be patient, but then once that time has lapsed, he will do what he needs to do. That to me has always been very mysterious, because it's like you don't know what that fixed time is. How is that
Right.
tomorrow, or is that 10 years from now? Is that what, and or what is the condition on? I mean, we have so many things that we know right now that are reaching like critical points and tipping points, right? So,
Right.
for example, global warming or climate change is
Right.
a really good example. If we don't get the temperature by a certain year, we're kind of basically it's too late to do anything beyond that.
All right.
I don't know of any other things, but or how how is this going to happen? We don't know when and how. We have no idea.
Right. Right. Well, it's very interesting because I've always had the sense that the House of Justice, which is always looking far into the future, it's really amazing if you talk to House members about why they're making certain decisions, to see the farsightedness of what they're doing. But they also know that we have to accomplish certain things by certain points to sort of, because we have these documents from not only the central figures, but Shoghi Effendi, that sort of lay out what we need to do. And if you don't do this, you can't do that. Like this last 25 years was necessary so we can go to the community building. We had to first have tools to do community building. So we spent 25 years developing the tools. Now we have the tools, now we do the community building. But we had to go through other stages to get to that point. We had to have administration well in place before we could even do the tool building. So all of these were necessary. We had to get the faith in most of the countries of the world. All these things had to be done, and we don't know the time frame for the master plan, but we have a pretty good sense of the time frame for these other aspects of the lesser plan of God that we're taking forward. So we know that the two are connecting, but we just don't know when and how. Hello, Sanaz.
Hi, sorry for being late.
That's all right. We won't dock you too much this time. But there will be a quiz. All right. So here's crystalline. I got a picture of, I don't know much about this mineral. Does anyone know much about it as to why this is crystallite, is why this particular mineral was called out in that? Any scientific background on that? If not, it's a mystery, but it must be.
Well, for me, the only thing that stands out is that, I mean, it's not that it glows, but it can kind of, if whatever you're gonna put in it, it'll have a big enough contrast for it to stand out. If that was diamond, you try to engrave on a diamond, you're not gonna see anything. So it's kind of like transparent if it was diamond. But I think in a sense is basically that Wall is saying, not only does God know about it, but it will it will all come out.
Right.
I don't think it has to do with, and there's probably another quality of it also being like that the documentation isn't, it's permanent.
Right.
It's really washed away. There's not a magic ink that turns invisible over time.
Right. Right.
But it would be more interesting if it was written on tablets of kryptonite, I think. That was a joke.
Yeah. Yeah, it has the color of kryptonite, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
And this is just me. So, but one of the interesting things in some Pilgrim's notes, Abdu'l-Baha was talking about how mankind has migrated from one place to another. And he said that the people that today we call Germans originated in the area that's now the Congo. And I found that really interesting in studying World War I, because what peoples really devastated the people of Belgium, who had just really, some of the worst atrocities of the colonial period happened in the name of the country of Belgium, the people of Belgium, against the people of the Congo. The Germans, who originally came from the Congo, in God's eyes, were the ones who really devastated the Congo, Belgium, the people of Belgium. So I found that, God has a different time sense than we do. Not to say that that was the retribution for what was done to the people of the Congo in the 19th century, but I just found that very interesting. So God has his timeline. Let's see, Mona, can you read this, please?
The whole earth, Baha'u'llah, on the other hand, forecasting the bright future in store for a world now wrapped in darkness, emphatically asserts, is now in a state of pregnancy. The day is approaching when it will have yielded its noblest fruits, when from it will have sprung forth the loftiest trees, the most enchanting blossoms, the most heavenly blessings. The time is approaching when every created thing will have cast its burden. Glorified be God who hath vouchsafed this grace that encompasseth all things, whether seen or unseen. These great oppressions he, moreover, foreshadowing humanity's golden age, has written, are preparing it for the advent of the most great justice. This most great justice is indeed the justice upon which the structure of the most great peace can alone and must eventually rest, while the most great peace will in turn usher in that world civilization, which shall remain forever associated with him who heareth the most great name.
So he's put us on a downer, and now he's showing us the bright light at the end of this long tunnel. Any thoughts on this? I thought it was very interesting that he sort of sets up this last sentence so that you have to have the most great justice before you can have the most great peace, which in turn leads to the most great, that world civilization, which will bear the most great name. So you have to have justice first, then you get peace, and only then do you get the world civilization. There are no shortcuts. Now he's starting to comment on the situation of the world. Sarush, can you read this, please?
Well nigh 100 years have elapsed since the revelation of Baha'u'llah dawned upon the world, a revelation the nature of which, as affirmed by himself, none among the manifestations of old, except to a prescribed degree, hath ever completely apprehended. For a whole century God has respited mankind, that it might acknowledge the founder of such a revelation, espouse his cause, proclaim his greatness, and establish his order. In 100 volumes, the repositories of priceless precepts, mighty laws, unique principles, impassioned exhortations, reiterated warnings, amazing prophecies, sublime invocations, and weighty commentaries, the bearer of such a message has proclaimed, as no prophet before him has done, the mission with which God had entrusted him. To emperors, kings, princes, and potentates, to rulers, governments, clergy, and peoples, whether of the East or of the West, whether Christian, Jew, Muslim, or Zoroastrian, he addressed for well nigh 50 years, and in the most tragic circumstances, these priceless pearls of knowledge and wisdom that lay hid within the ocean of his matchless utterance. Forsaking fame and fortune, accepting imprisonment and exile, careless of ostracism and obloquy, submit, is that right?
Yeah.
Submitting to physical indignities and cruel deprivations, he, the vicegerent of God on earth, suffered himself to be banished from place to place and from country to country, till at length he in the most great prison offered up his martyred son as a ransom for the redemption and unification of all mankind.
We verily, he himself has testified, have not fallen short of our duty to exhort men and to deliver that whereunto I was bidden by God, the Almighty, the All-Praised. Had they hearkened unto me, they would have beheld the earth another earth. And again, is there any excuse left for anyone in this revelation? No, by God, the Lord of the mighty throne, my signs have encompassed the earth, my power enveloped all mankind, and yet the people are wrapped in a strange sleep. So he did what he had to do, what he was sent here to do, and the fact we didn't pay attention is their problem. So now the Guardian is going into, these, by the way, are the subtitles that he allowed Horace Holly to create for this book. Donya, can you read this, please?
How, we may well ask ourselves, has the world, the object of such divine solicitude, repaid him who sacrificed his all for its sake? What manner of welcome did it accord him, and what response did his call evoke? A clamor, unparalleled in the history of Shia Islam, greeted in the land of its birth, the infinite light of the faith in the midst of a people notorious for its crass ignorance, its fierce fanaticism, its barbaric cruelty, its ingrained prejudices, and the unlimited sway held over the masses by a firmly entrenched ex-celestial hierarchy. A persecution kindling a courage which, as attested by no less eminent and authority than the late Lord Curzon of Cludston, has been unsurpassed by that which the fires of Smithfield evoked, mowed down with the tragic swiftness no less than 20,000 of its heroic adherents who refused to barter their newly born faith for the fleeting honors and security of a mortal life.
So he's talking about the persecution of the Babis and just how awful it was. And he says that Lord Curzon, who was, I think, the foreign secretary during the Bob's time, commented on it, and that it had surpassed the fires of Smithfield. What's he referring to when he says the fires of Smithfield? Anybody know their British history? Most likely not, right? Smithfield was is a suburb of a small town that today is a suburb of London, and it's where people were executed. And during the several hundred years where the British fought each other over the Reformation, Catholics and Protestants alike were burned at the stake, drawn and quartered, but particularly burned at the stake for their religious beliefs. And so this is the fires of Smithfield. He's talking about these Christian martyrs. And he says that what happened to the Babis was even worse than what happened in that terrible period of the Reformation. Christians killing each other over theology. So, Katya, can you read this, please?
To the bodily agonies inflicted upon these sufferers, the charges, so unmerited, of nihilism. Do you want me to read the definitions?
What's in the definition I added, so you can just read the list.
Okay. Nihilism, occultism, anarchism, eclecticism, immorality, sectarianism, heresy, political partisanship, each consecutively disproved by the tenets of the faith itself, by the conduct of its followers, were added, swelling thereby the number of those who, unwillingly or maliciously, were injuring its cause.
So the friends in Iran who were being persecuted, these are the grounds on which they were being persecuted. Nihilism, occultism, anarchism, eclecticism, immorality, sectarianism, heresy, and political partisanship. And friends, these are still what we're going to be accused of going forward.
Sanaz has a hand up. I don't know.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't see Sana in my group. Yes, Sanaz.
Yeah, I had a question about a few previous slides. So maybe you had explained it before I joined. It was about the most great justice.
Ah, yes.
So did Guardian define this term, or like what are the prerequisites for most great justice are, or?
I don't know. Does I have not seen a definition for that, but that's an excellent question. Has anyone else seen anything? It would be, maybe I can go on to Ocean this week and see if I can find that. Where else it might be used. I know a lot of you are well read in the writings. Have any of you come across the most great justice before? Well, Sanaz, I will try to see what I can find this week.
Okay, thank you.
Well, could it be referring to the Universal House of Justice?
I think that the Universal House of Justice is probably part of that, but I think it may be more than that. I don't know.
Or it could be the Kitab Akdas itself.
It could be the implementation of the Agdas. It could also be when the kings and rulers of the earth come together and in the meeting that Baha'u'llah talked about, where they set boundaries and essentially sort of resolve a lot of things.
But that wouldn't lead to the most great peace. That can only maximize the lesser peace.
Yeah,
That's actually that's more of like God's plan B.
Yeah.
If we
yeah,
right,
right,
refuse the most great peace, here's the consolation prize, the lesser peace.
right, exactly. So I don't know what most great justice is, but certainly the House of Justice would be part of that, but the House of Justice is in existence now, so I don't know. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, most great is Azam always in Farsi, or in Arabic it's Azam, right? So Hukla Azam. I think it's really referring to this 1,000-year period of which Baha'u'llah has actually come for to lay out.
Right. Well, we know the most great peace will come about during that 1,000-year period, but this has to happen before the most great peace happens.
Well, we also know that the foundation of peace is justice.
Right.
So I just think it's just the implementation of the Kitab Aqdas and the covenant, which would create as a guardian says, that justice would be upheld by a force,
Mm-hmm.
and that everything on the planet is synchronized, or not, sorry, regulated by the ministers of the House of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's the whole coming of Baha'u'llah. This dispensation is the dispensation of most great justice. I don't know any other.
Yeah,
This is just
I think that sounds very reasonable to me. I'll also see if it's used in some other places by the Guardian.
I recently read that though like the Universal House of Justice is a term we now use specifically for that body. There's a similar name I know for LSAs and NSAs.
Right.
I'm sure, yeah,
It's
Kathy.
the local House of Justice and National House of Justice, right?
Yeah, so it could be something broader having to do with that. I don't want to guess at what it is, but
Yeah. In Arabic, the Universal House of Justice in Arabic is actually like when Farsi we say Baytulat Azam, and Azam means most great or the greatest. So I think Sanaz would know more about that. I think she grew up in Iran and she has fluency.
Good question. We'll see if we can find the answer in this next week. So Sanaz, can I get you to read this?
Sure. Unmitigated indifference on the part of men of eminence and rank, unrelenting hatred shown by the ecclesiastical
Mhm.
dignitaries of the faith from which it had sprung, the scornful derision of the people among whom it was born, the utter contempt which most of those kings and rulers who had been addressed by its author manifested towards it, the condemnations pronounced, the threats hurled, and the banishments decreed by those under whose sway it arose and first spread, the distortion to which its principles and laws were subjected by the envious and the malicious, in lands and among people far beyond the country of its origin. All these are but the evidences of the treatment meted out by a generation sunk in self-content, careless of its God, and oblivious of the omens, prophecies, warnings, and admonitions revealed by his messengers.
Any comments on this? Unmitigated indifference on the part of men of eminence and rank. You know, it's interesting, when Abdul Baha was in Paris, because Europe has a history, but particularly the French, of atheism and agnosticism. He talked about how the people of France who didn't care about religion, it was worse than being atheist to not care. So unmitigated indifference, as well as unrelenting hatred, scornful derision. We need to expect this. So, Martine, can you read this, please?
Yep. The blows so heavily dealt the followers of so precious, so glorious, so potent a faith failed, however, to assuage the animosity that inflamed its persecutors. Nor did the deliberate and mischievous misrepresentations of its fundamental teachings, its aims and purposes, its hopes and aspirations, its institutions and activities suffice to say the hand of the oppressor and the calumniator, who sought by every means in their power to abolish its name and extirpate its system. The hand which had struck down so vast a number of its blameless and humble lovers and servants was now raised to deal its founders the heaviest and cruelest blows.
And so then he reminds us of what the Bob suffered. I'm not going to go through all of this, but the Bob, the point is affirmed by Baha'u'llah, around whom the manifestations and the prophet, around whom the realities of the prophets and messengers revolved. Then he talks about all of the things that happened to the Bob and the Babis. These were the progressive stages in the tumultuous and tragic ministry of one whose age inaugurated the consummation of all ages, and whose revelation fulfilled the promise of all revelations. So here's this terrible treatment for the Lord of the age. And then this one quote from the Bab himself, where he says, "I swear by God, shouldest thou know the things which in the space of these 4 years have befallen me at the hands of thy people and thine army, thou wouldst hold thy breath from fear of God." And then goes on to more specifically talk about the terrible things that happened in Maku and Shirak. "How veiled are ye, O my creatures," he says in the Bayan. "All that is on earth hath been created for him, and all partake with delight of his benefits, and yet they are so veiled from him as to refuse him even a lamp." Then the Guardian goes on to talk about Baha'u'llah's suffering. What of Baha'u'llah, the germ of whose revelation, as attested by the Bab, is endowed with a potency superior to the combined forces of the Babi dispensation? Was he not? He for whom the Bab had suffered and died in such tragic and miraculous circumstances, made for nearly half a century and under the domination of the two most powerful potentates of the East, the object of a systematic and concerted conspiracy, which in its effects and duration is scarcely paralleled in the annals of previous religions. It's so interesting. He says Baha'u'llah became the object of a systematic and concerted conspiracy. And then he goes on to talk, he quotes, the Guardian quotes Baha'u'llah himself about the terrible things he suffered. "By the righteousness of God, every morning I arose from my bed, I discovered the host of countless afflictions masked behind my door. And every night when I lay down low, my heart was torn with agony at what it had suffered from the fiendish cruelty of its foes. With every piece of bread, the ancient beauty breaketh, is coupled the assault of a fresh affliction. And with every drop he drinketh is mixed the bitterness of the most woeful of trials. He is preceded in every step he taketh by an army of unforeseen calamities, while in his rear follow legions of agonizing sorrows. And then the guardian goes on himself to expound upon some of Baha'u'llah's sufferings. Here we have the Siyachal. And then quoting Baha'u'llah himself about, we are consigned to a place foul beyond comparison. As to the dungeon in which this wronged one and others similar wronged were confined, a dark and narrow pit were preferable. And remember, the guardian has already quoted from Baha'u'llah and the Bab about the retribution of God. And now we're seeing all the things, the guardian is making sure we remember all of the sufferings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And here's another whole page of the suffering of Baha'u'llah. Okay, so Donya, can you read this, please?
Severe as were these tribulations, which succeeded one another with bewildering rapidity as a result of the premeditated attacks and the systematic how do you say that word? Machinations of the court, the clergy, the government, and the people. They were but the prelude to a harrowing and extensive captivity which that edict had formally initiated, extending over a period of more than 40 years and carrying him successively to Iraq, Soleimaniye, Constantinople, Adrianople, and finally to the penal
colony of Akka.
Penal colony of Akka. This long banishment was at last ended by his death at the age of over 70 years and 10, terminating a captivity which, in its range, its duration, and the diversity and severity of its afflictions, is unexampled in the history of previous dispensations. No need to expatiate on the particular episodes which cast a lurid light on the moving annals of those years. No need to dwell on the character and actions of the peoples, rulers, and divines who have participated in and contributed to the heighten and poignancy of the scenes of this, the greatest drama in the world's spiritual history.
You know, we often think about Jesus's crucifixion and how awful it was. Hollywood is getting better and better at graphic depictions of it, but that only lasted about 12 hours. This went on for well over 40 years and included physical torture as well as these years of banishment and captivity. So I think we are coming to the last few minutes of this 90-minute session tonight. And so we have a few minutes to see if there are any additional comments, questions, thoughts. And also, what would you like to do? Would you like more of a summary, or would you like to keep having at least the text up there like we did tonight?
I really like what we've been doing so far.
Same, I agree.
Good. Okay, well, I'll try to give you how far we'll go over this next week. So if you want to look at it, you can read The Guardian many times and still see new things. And he'll also expand your vocabulary. Any questions, comments, or thoughts about this? Was there anything that tonight was new to you or that you hadn't thought about?
I feel like as much as you know, the words about Duha and Baha'u'llah are, you know, of course are extremely important. I feel like I almost relate more with Shoghi Effendi's writing and his sort of modern words, and his relatableness to the things that are going on today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel like he really plugs us in.
Right. You wouldn't guess this was, if you just were unfamiliar with it and that read that opening paragraph, you would think he was writing it today, not in 1941.
I think something else that's like not really, I guess at this point is surprising, but it's like exactly, it's like the fact that we think this is written today kind of scares me because you would think that 100 years from or whatever at that point, 90 years, that things would be tremendously different. But you know, it's almost like his words ring in what was then, even now.
Well, you know, speaking as someone who is a student of history, today we are all shocked by what's going on in Ukraine. But the numbers of people being killed is infinitely smaller than a single night of firebombing or whatever that happened in World War II. Not to say that those kind of numbers won't happen again, but mankind is more easily shocked than it used to be because we don't consider going in and leveling a city to be acceptable behavior anymore as a means of national policy. Stealing one people's country because you want it. You know, this is no longer acceptable. So mankind has made some mental adjustments in our attitudes since the time this was written, but we still have people out there who have access to the machinery of nations and particularly weapons that can still wreak havoc, even if most of the world now rejects what they're doing. So, and we have to remember that as bad as the situations we're going through, Baha'u'llah knew what it was to suffer. The Bab knew what it was to suffer. They experienced it firsthand and watched their families experience it. So here in Florida, it is now midnight. And it's nice to see your faces again after an absence. So I hope that we can continue this on. I am very willing to keep on going as long as you folks are willing to have me. And I appreciate your comments because I learned from you too. You're thinking deeply about all this. So
Thank you so
we'll
much,
leave it
Kathy.
there. It's my
Thank you.
pleasure. All right, same time, this same place next week, right? And I'll
Yep.
send out to Martine how far we'll try and go.
All
Good.
right, perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you. Let me hit stop share here. Here we go.
We know it's like very late for you over there. It's almost, it's actually, it's 12 o'clock in the morning in Florida.
Well, the good thing about being retired is I can take naps, right? So, all right. Have a good week. Aloha.